For business acumen in any business, like all small business owners, as we know, cash flow is important. If you don't know what happens to your money coming in and while you've got it and where it's got to go after, then you could be in trouble. Same as it is with legal. If you don't get good legal advice before the bottom of the world falls apart, you can also find yourself in trouble. And on that segue, Vivian.
Yes.
How bad is it when you get no legal advice? Let's not say bad legal advice, but let's say no legal advice when someone chooses to be their own lawyer.
Oh, it can be very bad. It's almost as bad as doing your own will and leaving it up to chance.
Leave everything to me, yes.
That's right, exactly. You ultimately could end up in the courts and in litigation, and that could cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars that you don't have. Whereas, for example, reviewing an agreement up front could only cost you a few $1,000s.
So essentially what we're saying is that you might think that the agreement is straightforward. You might think that by adding one of your own creative lines that you've covered everything.
Yes.
But the reality is you're not a lawyer.
Correct.
Right.
And you haven't seen it all.
That's right. You haven't seen it all. and a court experience is not where you want to cut your teeth on it, right?
Definitely not.
Baby steps. Baby steps.
Great.
So, Brian, when we look at the financial situation of any business and when they interpret their own cash flow, so I like to think of it as a cash register. So money coming into the till. Now, not all of that is mine. Is that where we start to make our mistakes when we don't understand how to allocate the funds?
Well, I think what we've just got to understand is when our key inflows are and when our outflows are, and what I call the cash gap, which is when we have to make our payments, when that compares to when we get paid by customers. So each month, normal business would have a payroll. People don't take IOUs. You've got to pay people every month, and you've got to make sure the cash is in the bank for that at that time. And that's the key. And you've got to understand that in relation to when your customers pay you, and that's what I call that funding gap. And if you don't understand that or get that wrong, that can be detrimental regardless of how good you think your business is.
So we can't pay too much attention to our cash, right? Our income coming in is something we need to have a lot of healthy respect for.
Absolutely.
Is budget the right word?
I think budget is usually a bit strong. I mean, we can overdo budgets, but I think budgets are really important just to have a foresight on terms of where your cash is going to actually land. You've got to have that firm picture, and you've got to have that firm picture of where the revenue is going to come from to pay for your outgoings. So
you need to know how much it's going to cost you or how much it costs you every week to put the key in the door, so to speak, even if it is a virtual door. You need to know.
Every business should know what is their run rate of costs or overheads going out, and they need to make sure there's enough in the bank to cover those at the right time.
Vivian, if we look at the environment right now, and people are very mindful of where the government has introduced different types of, for instance, relaxing some of the insolvency laws, we've got JobKeeper, and of course we've got the Mandatory Tenancies Code, which in every state may or may not vary, as we are right across Australia. So when we look at those key issues happening right now in today's climate, what do we need to navigate carefully?
We need to navigate our biggest issues first. And for a lot of people at the moment, it may be debt, understanding exactly how to go about chasing that debt. And then the leases. Leases are very important at the moment, especially negotiating those leases, whether you get a lawyer to assist you in negotiating or an agent. It is very important to ensure that the landlords and the tenants are held accountable to that code.
So as you mentioned just quickly at the beginning there, you need to prioritise what you're going to chase down, right?
Correct.
You can't allow yourself to be overwhelmed. I mean, you might have to deal with JobKeeper. What does that look like? You might have to look at your debt. What does that look like? And then you mentioned the agreement. What about the view that people are disregarding their leases, thinking that the Mandatory Tenancies Code applies to every component of the lease when it doesn't? We still need to abide by the other conditions of the lease, don't we?
Yeah, just definitely you have to be very careful, because right now it might be a moratorium on chasing debts or chasing outstanding lease payments, but that cliff is going to come, whether it be at the end of September and we're just waiting for the laws to come out on the leases, whether that's going to extend past September or it's going to be March when JobKeeper ends. So you have to be very careful. If you're not paying your rent, you could be chased by the landlord come 1st of October.
That's right. You could find yourself into a whole new world of pain.
Correct.
Thinking, Brian, I want to check with you. So we have financial platforms that we should be aware of, right? So if we're looking at our budgets or where our cash flow's got to go,
Yep.
what else should we be worried about in terms of the financial world of our business?
Well, I think in the financial world of business, you should always have a really good picture of what your business model is. You need to define that and have it down to a T, how you're going to generate your income. And you need to be monitoring those metrics along the way so that when that income comes in, you know it's going to come in at the right timing to pay those bills. But I think with that modelling, it also it helps you with your profitability, because if you haven't got the model right, you don't know if what you're doing is profitable. So it's really important that you have that business model in mind and are able to expand on that and make sure that that's driving the cash flows that are driving your business.
So people would normally think that your world is very dry. It's numbers.
Yeah.
But one thing you just said for us to pick up on there is that it's also about understanding your revenue streams.
Yes.
And being able to anticipate those. In our world right now of COVID, a lot of people didn't have alternate revenue streams. So part of resilience should be planning, where else can I get my money from if that line of income dries up?
Absolutely. Well, I think, one of the things I always look at in a business is have they got any single point of failure? And what you've seen with, COVID, unfortunately, is businesses with
defined.
single revenue streams have come unstuck. Now, it's not always possible, and there's some big organisations that get it wrong too, that can't avoid that. But I think you've got to look at your business from that perspective, because it's not just about revenue streams, it's also about people. Have you got some people in your organisation that own some key information that you haven't got documented? Because that can cause a few issues as well.
That's an uh-oh.
Yeah, that's what do I do about that?
So you really do have to go through the worst case scenario.
Correct.
In order to prepare for it.
Absolutely.
And whilst we might never have thought that rainy day was going to come, it's arrived.
Yes.
And it's here to stay for a little while. So we need to be mindful of that, right? From a legal and financial perspective.
100%. I think as long as we're mindful of it, we can plan for it, and that's the key.
I'll keep that in mind next time I come up to a pandemic. Vivian, we do have a couple of questions coming in, so I just want to cover them. If people can't afford unlimited legal and they're working within small budgets, what areas should business owners prioritise spend in terms of legal? That is for Anonymous.
Yeah. Hi, Anonymous.
It's not my mother.
That's a very good question. Definitely, I think the first thing you have to spend some time and money on is your terms and conditions, because that's your trade agreement. That's the agreement you have with your customers or your clients. That's where the revenue stream is coming in as well. So that needs to be finalized for sure. My next position, and Brian might correct me if I'm wrong, but would be, I reckon, the shareholders agreement or the agreement between business owners if you have more than one business owner. But definitely, I think at the end of the day, people might think that legal advice is quite expensive. You need to find a trusted advisor, someone to sit down with, to have a conversation with, that can point you in the right direction and answer those questions. Your terms and conditions might be perfectly fine, and it might be a different pain point that you have to look at.
What you just brought up in terms of, and mindful of this question about how much to budget for, I think is it also important to say that people should sit down and think before they go and have a meeting with the legal advisor and maybe write down the things they want covered.
Definitely.
That way they can cover it all and get their real bang for buck, right, for their appointment.
Definitely. And a lot of good legal advisors would want to understand your business as a whole. Instead of treating you just as that one-off job of the review of terms and conditions or review of employment agreements, they should want to understand your business and want to work with you, because there should be a relationship exercise going forward as well, not a once-off task.
Can I just add to a couple of points there? The terms and conditions I wanted to catch on, because I think that's really important. A lot of people come to me and they think the terms and conditions are just payment terms, but it's not. It's actually the terms and conditions under which you supply your goods and services. As well. And there's a lot of other things, and that all links in with your cost base, because you have your cost base structured around your standard terms and conditions, and getting that right is absolutely critical. So that was one thing. The shareholders agreement, all I would say to everyone, it's very easy to have a shareholders agreement right at the start when there's only 2 shareholders. But if you've already established a business and you have 50 shareholders, it becomes a lot more difficult. So, do it early is what I would say.
Well, while we're on you, here's the next question. Can you give us some tips on how to manage our cash flow during these times? Really important when people are struggling. I'm not sure it's an easy question to answer. But nevertheless, give it a go, Brian.
I'll give it a go. I mean, it's actually no different to any other time. It's the answer. But in terms of measuring cash flow, I always work on two models. I have a monthly forecast which I use, which gives you a more long-term effect. But when you're looking at a monthly forecast, it doesn't tell you what's happening during the month. So you've also got to do your sort of daily, weekly one where you just do back of an envelope, how much is coming in this week, who have I got to chase, all that thing. And that really is the oxygen in your business. And have I got enough for payroll is usually the critical question that most small businesses want to ask.
Round up, not down.
Yeah.
Is the secret. If it looks like $120, make it $200. So what are some interesting pricing options for services? And I think that's a question around would you price yourself at different points and make sure that that's very clear and very documented. I mean, in the legal profession, you charge on increments. Might not be an hourly rate. It might. Yes. Yeah, that's right. Talk fast. But that's just it. You could pay as part of a pricing policy and you could charge as part of a pricing policy. Would that be, so getting your bang for buck when you're going somewhere where the increments are 6 minutes?
Yeah, I would more go the other way. If you're talking about pricing, I don't know if you're talking about services or in what context, but let's assume you're talking about
we're being a bit
services.
General, yep.
I would first think more about what you want and what you're going to get first, and then price it from there. It's a lot easier to know what you're aiming at and then come up with a budget for what that's going to cost. What you don't want to be is in an open-ended situation where, it's all about time. You want to have some commitment on both sides.
So, Vivian, when we consider how important succession planning is, because it really is something that people don't always consider when they start a business. Yes. What does my exit look like? Will I be handing it over? Will someone be inheriting? All these things. There'd have to be an airtight agreement in there. I mean, you had litigation at HMT, and you always smile. Every time I talk to Vivian about going to court, she smiles. It's like the silent assassin. So you really do want to make sure that you've dotted your I's and crossed the T's in that type of agreement.
Look, just going back.
If you've even thought of it, right?
I mean, no agreement is airtight. No agreement is, because it doesn't capture everything that could potentially ever happen.
It can't, right?
It can't. No agreement found the pandemic. There's probably no agreement out there that has a clause about how to deal with the pandemic. However, you want to capture...
But there will be.
There will be going forward. There will be. But you want to capture every possible option going forward. So that's as close to an airtight agreement as we're ever going to get. Right. However, in terms of succession planning, I think it's very important. People think about succession planning for their own estate, their own personal stuff, their house, their car, the dog,
That's serious. The dog is serious.
It is. But they don't think about it when it comes to the business because they're so focused on growing the business, building the business, cash flow, and all of these things that one day they turn around and they go, I've built this empire, but I haven't worked out what's going to happen to it when I want to exit or when I pass away or when my children...
sell it.
Or sell it, exactly right. My philosophy has always been to build your business as if you were going to sell it. But at the end of the day, it's something that you have to think about. And for people, the questions that I get from clients are, what happens when I want to leave? What happens if there's a child working in the business? What about their spouse? What if their spouse gets a hold of this business that I've built? What if there's a marriage breakdown? These are things that you should be considering in terms of that succession planning and speaking to your lawyers or your advisors about what you should be doing and what agreements you should be putting in place to look after that.
Brian, in your work as an outsourced CFO, and everyone should have one, because you can't be all things to everyone in a business. You can't be the brains of the talent and do the money, unless you're a female in business. So in terms of, if we look at succession planning, that's a really important financial component of the business as well, what you might end up taking out or what that looks like handing it over, what your goodwill might be worth. What other things should people keep in mind when they talk about succession planning financially?
Well, it's a really big thing when you look at all the different options that could exist. I mean, you talk about family businesses. I mean, if you think you build a business for your inheritance and you sell it to your son, well, your inheritance probably just disappeared. How much money have they got to buy a business? But I think it's more, you've got to look at it a bit more maturely. And Vivian, touched on a really strong point. I mean, I always believe you should be in business that anyone could walk through the door at any time and want to buy it, and you need to be sale ready. And if you adopt that approach, what it means is you're putting a whole lot of systems and processes and rigour in place in the business that you should be doing anyway. But if a buyer walks in, that's going to get you the premium price if you've got that.
Get ready.
Get ready. And also, identify, with yourself, a lot of business owners and small business, it's really just them, me, myself and I. It's trying to identify that next tier and surrounding yourself with good people. Now, quite often a small business can't afford to employ those people, but there are others around who can come in and help them.
So I think you can all hear that having the complementary focus on legal and, of course, on financial or money, that's really vital to your business. Another vital part of your business could be your team, and it's a place where we all get into trouble, right? It happens. So in terms of making sure that you're covered from an employment law perspective, which, I'm not sure if you're aware of the stats now, but unfair dismissals have gone up by 70% right now because of the current climate or lack thereof. So if you haven't been careful, you could find yourself pushing the proverbial uphill and it costing you thousands of dollars for an employee to lodge a claim at $74.50. For an employer to deal with that claim, Vivian, what happens?
Well, I mean, you could always deal with the claim yourself. That doesn't always end well.
No.
My advice always has been to ensure that claim never comes about. So putting things in place, whether that be the employment agreement, a strategy with that employee, and other things that you have in place to ensure that you never get to that point. Now, if you have to get to that point, you can engage a lawyer to help you, and it depends on budget, but they can assist you in the background or they can assist you the whole way. It doesn't have to be an all-in approach, but definitely it is something that you need assistance with. It's not something that I would recommend people do it themselves, especially where employees are probably favoured in Fair Work and the tribunal in that sense as well. So
it's having the right framework at the beginning of any, before you enter into any agreement. And it's a good investment because it's not like you're going to go to the lawyer every time you've employed someone. Right. You might have a standard contract that you use and it applies with only small variations.
That's right. Like we draft standard contracts that the business can use ongoing. Unless it needs to be specialised, then they can come back to us. But generally, when a business comes to us, we say, right, we'll draft you one standard employment agreement with the schedule that you can fill out going forward.
Unless they, employ someone like me and there's DIVA requirements and they need to be factored in.
That's right.
Brian, how do you know if someone's performed in your business?
Well, this is I guess something small businesses do struggle with, because generally what I hear is, they're really good, they're really performing well, they're doing a great job. But if you ask why, a lot of the small business owners have trouble articulating that. What you really need to have are some measures in your business, and it doesn't need to be hundreds. It needs to be a few key measures that you monitor that depict a person's performance, so that what you've done is you've now put the grey into a black and white area where there's a number or a figure or a KPI that you need to hit, key performance indicator. That helps you monitor performance and know why they're performing and why they're not. But the thing where it comes back to the whole HR thing is what it does is nothing's absolute. Right? It's not you did or you didn't. It more is about a conversation, right? You've now got a topic or substance around to have a conversation with the employee, and that's where what is the most important thing, it's the conversations and how you engage with your staff.
If we look at a business structure in terms of an executive team, people who have worked for large corporations or even medium-sized corporations would be familiar in the structure of a corporate entity and the fact there's an executive.
Yes.
When you branch out on your own and you are suddenly wearing 12 hats, minimum of, it's a good idea to try and still have an executive per se, and that could be your legal advisor, an outsourced CFO, but still having that executive team, even if they are only part-time or once or twice a year, how many checks and balances would put in place for a small business owner?
Well, I like to say to a small business owner, you should try and run your business like a public company. Now, that's without all the overheads and structure, but essentially when you say an executive team in a large business, they all look pretty much the same. You've got a sales guy, a marketing guy, a finance guy.
Or woman.
Or woman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. But you've basically got your team. And the thing is, in a small business, you don't have those because they're all you. And the next level, don't have the experience, they're more transactional people. But you can get access to those people on a part-time basis or consulting basis until you build it into a full-time role. But the most important thing is you're bringing experience and expertise into your business through that channel, so that when you're sitting in that executive team, it's contributing to your decision-making process.
Well, the big companies have the board that kind of does that, because they're not managing the day-to-day operations like the executive. They're more there for the inspiration and the big ideas and the connections, which a small business needs too. You know, you sometimes when you're so close to something, you don't see the forest for the trees. So finding people that are even there for just 3 or 4 times a year is still key. It's the advantage, right?
Yeah.
Over other small businesses.
Absolutely.
And we're all looking for that.
Yeah.
Vivian, we brushed on cheekily around COVID and leases right now. Are you drafting up COVID-proof leases? Are you putting in a special clause that says, if COVID-19 descends upon me again?
Do you know what's interesting? Not a lot of people are entering into leases at this point in time. So I haven't had the opportunity to draft it. Most people are just kind of waiting it out to see what's going to happen post-COVID. I don't think there's going to be a post-COVID. It's probably going to be with us for a while. So it's the new norm.
Or at least being aware of it is going to be the new norm.
That's right. So definitely it is something that will be drafted in leases to come and agreements to come.
Yeah.
It won't just be leases.
No, we will have to think of that plan B all the time.
Definitely.
And just very quickly, and we just need to wrap up, so I'm going to ask you both this question. Should you be considering liquidation if you're receiving JobKeeper? Because that's going to affect both of you here.
You go
I
first.
think
That feels like a big answer.
it is. It is a big answer because there's no diplomatic way of saying it. Look, I think if you are trading insolvent, it is something to definitely be considering sooner rather than later, because, like I said, a cliff is coming, whether that's for some people, it'll be the 1st of October, and for some people, it'll be the 1st of April. So getting your information now, sitting with experts, understanding what the next step is going to be before it happens is probably my best advice.
And then just really quickly, Brian,
Look, I would
if you're struggling anyway, what are you doing with JobKeeper?
Exactly. If you're struggling anyway, I think the business tells the story. What you've got to be able to see, and everyone's been given a bit of a lifeline with JobKeeper, but you need to be able to see where the improvement is coming. And again, it comes back to normal good business practice. You need to be able to see where the improvement is and where it's coming from, is what I would suggest. Otherwise, you need to be looking at that, because when it all stops, you're going to be in that position.
Yes, you're going to need more than an outsourced CFO and HNT Legal. Thank you very much to Vivian from HNT Legal and Brian Doughty, outsourced CFO, financial CFO. Okay, look, we've had a great session now, but I'm sure you all realise how vitally important it is for your business acumen to get your legal and your cash flow, your money right.